Okay, now the interesting one. After we do plant diversity, we look at animal diversity or animal biodiversity. Let's remind ourselves quickly, what does the word biodiversity means? It means the variety of all the animals on earth, only animals. So in this topic, rather, or chapter, we're going to be looking at the differences that all of these animals, all of these organisms under the animal kingdom have. And then we're further going to classify them according to their similarities and differences under the animal kingdom, which basically we move down to phyla, right? Good. So what are we going to be looking, for example, if we look at the animal kingdom, there's mainly two groups, right? Those without a vertebral column, a backbone, and those with a backbone. The backboned ones are basically known as the vertebrates, and then the ones without a backbone are known as the invertebrates. Good. And then in that we're going to be looking at them and then how they're classified into different phyla. For example, we can see now starfishes, for example, will be classified under the phylum Echinodermata, and then we have your mollusca, phylum Mollusca, your sponges, which are your porifera, so forth and so forth. So basically, we're going to be looking at that. But before we get into it, we need to crack something, right? We need to crack or basically understand what sets them apart. It's their bodily features. I think going forward, you'll be introduced to a type of diagram like this. This is known as a phylogenetic tree. Now, what does a phylogenetic tree have? It does. It basically groups organisms according to uh, their similarities and differences. Basically, looking at their shared derived characteristics. What are shared and derived characteristics? Basically, all the characteristics that these organisms develop over time. This phylogenetic tree basically shows not all, most of the animal kingdom phyla. According to the one that is least developed, we'll be looking at your porifera, and to the ones that are most developed or most complex, right? And then they all arise from one common ancestor, the last known the common ancestor, which is a unicellular protista. So it's very easy to read this diagram. The unicellular protista had no tissue layers, and then from there, from the unicellular protista evolved the sponges, your porifera, and then from there, over time, they had one gut opening, and then they formed tissue layers, and then those organisms were known as nidaria. So if it has tissue layers, it can no longer be called porifera. It is nidaria. Your jellyfishes, for example, your Portuguese man of war. So basically, that's what your phylogenetic tree shows you. We'll get more into that as we solve questions that involve a phylogenetic tree. I think you were introduced to this when we were doing plant diversity. We touched a bit on a phylogenetic tree. Now, back to my main objective for the upcoming lesson. We're going to be looking at basically the basic body plans of these organisms. What do I mean by the body plans? How they differ according to what they have in their bodies. For example, I've already shown you here. Do they have a one gut, basically one opening, or two openings? For example, we as humans, we have two openings. One is the mouth, and the other one is the anus. Some organisms do not. You understand? Good. So basically, that's what the body plans are. What I'm gonna be focusing on. Starting with what? Starting with body symmetry and civilization. Now, let me start with civilization. With this, I want to summarize it and show you basically what we're going to be dealing with. Right? Where's my whiteboard? Yes. So it is civilization and body symmetry. What is this? What is civilization? Civilization is known as the concentration of your sense organs in the posterior end of the, no, anterior, né? end of the body, basically on the head of the organism. So most of our sense organs are concentrated on the anterior end of our body, which is our head. You have your eyes, your ears, your tongue, so forth and so forth. So if most of your sense organs, if most of the organism's sense organs are concentrated on the anterior end of the body, that we say that that organism has what we call cephalization. So basically cephalization and body symmetry. That's what we're going to be looking. What is body symmetry? So I want to make just a summary of it. Right. So what are we going to be looking at? We're going to be looking at civilization, obviously. And then symmetry, we're going to be looking at what is the three different types of symmetry. We have organisms that are asymmetrical. So we're going to be looking at asymmetry. Then next, we will look at organisms that have what we call a radial symmetry. Then we're going to be looking at organisms that have bilateral symmetry. So these are what we're going to be looking at. Obviously, we're going to be looking at what cephalization really is. Cephalization. But we already know what cephalization is. Basically, if you have an organism and most of its sense organs, for example, are concentrated at the anterior end, which is the front, the top part of the organism, that is cephalization. All right. Good. Let's put you here. Now, let's look at the different body plans. Now, we have asymmetrical organisms, basically. Then we have radial symmetry and then bilateral symmetry. Good. These are the examples. Now, let's get into it. Let's look at what these really mean. Asymmetrical organisms like an amoeba that protist and sponges. Your sponges are from the phylum Porifera. They have no symmetry. Basically means if you cut this organism longitudinally from any direction, if you cut it, will it have two identical halves? No. If I cut this one over here, it will not have any identical halves. So for example, we know the amoeba as being a shapeless organism, a shapeless protist. So if I cut here, for example, I just want to make an example for you. If I cut it here, will I have two identical halves? Half 1 and 2? No. If I cut it from this direction, do I have two identical halves? No. From this direction, from that direction, even whichever direction I cut it from longitudinally, I will not have identical halves. So we say that these ones don't have perfect symmetry. They are asymmetrical. Okay? Good. And then we have ones that are radially symmetrical. Radial symmetry, meaning that this body plan can be cut through in more than one plane and you will still obtain the exact same two halves. Usually these organisms are known to be sessile. What do we mean by sessile? Sessile meaning they cannot move on their own. They are sedentary. Yeah? Good. So if I take this, let's see if I can draw this properly. Let's take a square. Let's say this is a square. Each side measures 1 centimeter. Right? Now, if I cut this square in this way, where is my pen? If I cut the square this way, do I have two identical halves? Let's say I cut it exactly in the middle. Yes, I'll have two identical halves. If I cut it from the other direction, will I have two identical halves? Yes, I will. If I cut it from this direction, will I have two identical halves? Yes, I will. If I cut it from this direction, will I have two identical halves? Yes, I will. So basically, you can cut it from any plane, from any direction, and you will still have two identical halves. That is your radial symmetry, which mostly is your phylum Nidaria. Nidaria is your jellyfish. If you cut a jellyfish from any plane, basically you will have two identical halves. And then the third one is your by meaning two, bilateral symmetry. So this body plane can be divided into two identical halves only in one plane. If you cut it from one plane, and you will have two identical halves. What do we mean? This a perfect example would be your animals under the phylum Chordata. We have bilateral symmetry. If you cut me in half, basically, from the front going down. So if I take uh, Tabo here, he has one eye, a nose, and a mouth, an ear, and then there's his neck, an arm, and two legs. If I take Tabo here and cut him like this, I'm gonna have two identical half. One half having one ear, half of a mouth, half of a nose, and one eye, one arm, one leg, so forth and so forth. Ne? But however, interestingly enough, if I take Tab and cut him from this plane here, will I have two identical halves? No. This half will contain the head and everything else, and this half will contain the legs and everything else. So these are not identical halves, similar to this goat. If you cut it across like this, you'll get two identical halves, right? But if you cut it like this, you will not get identical halves. So basically, those are animals that can be cut from one plane and you'll have two identical halves. So those are known as bilateral symmetrical organisms. Yeah? So now that we know what is bilateral symmetry, asymmetry, radial symmetry, yeah, now we must look at their advantages. Why do these organisms have these things? Why are they why are they the way they are? And then what is the advantage and disadvantages of them? So bilateral symmetry basically, uh, example, humans, butterfly, lizards, cats, and etc. Advantages of this, basically, they can find food, mates, avoid predators because due to good muscle control and the presence of sensory organs. So basically, bilateral symmetrical organisms have what we call cephalization. Ne? Then sensory organs are located near the anterior end of the body. That is what we call cephalization. Yeah? Good. In summary, asymmetry, there's no symmetry of the body, and then there's no pattern to parts. They are irregularly shaped, cannot divide into two halves. Radial symmetry, body parts are arranged around the central axis, basically, and then you can cut it from any plane and it will give you the identical halves. Then radial animals have no front or back end. They only have one end. Ne? Good. Then body parts, bilateral symmetry, body parts are arranged on either side of the central axis. Basically, it can be cut in one plane and it will give you the exactly two identical images. They have a front and back end. So they have two ends. Then mostly are defined by dorsal and ventral surfaces. Now let's look at the advantages and disadvantages. Let's start with asymmetrical organisms. Advantages that food and oxygen can be absorbed through the whole body. So they can exchange food and gases, do gaseous exchange and feed almost every part of their body can do that because they have they can absorb food and gases directly. They can exchange food and gases directly with their environment, right? Then examples of these are your sponges. So sponges are very good at that. And then disadvantages now. Animals are often sessile, meaning they cannot move on their own. Basically, they are prone to predators. Basically, movement is absent or ineffective. Civilization does not occur. So they have no civilization whatsoever. So Number one, they are standing in one place. Number two, they have no sense organs. They have no civilization. Their sense organs basically are not concentrated on the anterior end of the body. Yeah? So why is this a disadvantage? They fall uh, prey to their predators easily because they cannot anticipate or locate their predators. Then radial symmetry. Those are the ones, remember, that can be cut from any plane and they'll produce two identical halves. Advantages of them, the body plan can obtain food from all directions. They can, not from every part of their body, but from all directions. Why this? All from all directions, stimuli can be observed in all directions for protection and catching prey. So basically, since they can receive stimuli from all directions, it's very easy for them to locate their prey from all directions. One, they're not stopping. Then they can protect themselves because not only can they locate their prey from all directions, they can locate where the danger is. They know where the danger is, these ones, right? Good. Then bilateral symmetry. Advantages of oh no, we're not done here. Disadvantages of radial symmetry: movement is slow. These ones are usually slow, or they can be sessile as well. There is no concentrated nervous system, so basically with them as well, cephalization does not occur. Now, bilateral symmetry, which is us, we have cephalization, a concentration of all sense sense tissue or organs on the anterior end of the body. Yeah? Cephalization causes the sensory organs to be concentrated on the anterior end. Thus, movement is very fast and effective. Because basically we move forward. We are able to basically move very quick and effective. That's why they can turn very easily. They can locate their prey with using cephalization. Disadvantage: due to cephalization, the organisms may have blind spots. They cannot see behind them. So take fish for example. It cannot see, or a snake cannot see behind itself. Well, they don't have good vision as well. But take us for example, we can't see behind us is a blind spot. So we have a blind spot, so that is the disadvantage of having cephalization. But it also serves us as an advantage because we can effectively move and then locate prey with that. So that is basically your cephalization and body symmetry. Good. Activity 1. Let's see if we understand this. Study the diagrams below and answer the questions that follow. You are given organisms A, B, and C. 1.1, give the body symmetry of the organisms A to C. What is the body symmetry, type of symmetry that they have? What are the advantages of an organism that has bilateral symmetry? Give the letters of organisms that show cephalization. Pause this video and then do the activity, and then we'll come back for corrections. Right, welcome back. Let's look at the corrections. Now we are given organisms A, B, and C. Yeah? Good. We'll come back to that one. I just need to correct this one. Now, number 1, give the body symmetry. If you see, if I cut the crab from this side to this side, I will not get symmetry, right? But if I cut it from this plane, I get two identical halves. So if I can cut it only from one plane, that means it is bilaterally symmetrical. Same with this earthworm. If I cut it from here, nope, I will not get two identical halves. But if I cut along this axis longitudinally, I can get two identical halves. So it is also bilateral symmetry. And then obviously the lizards, the vertebrate, if I cut it from longitudinally like this, I will get two identical halves. But if I cut it like this, I will not. So it has bilateral symmetry as well. What are the advantages of an organism that has bilateral symmetry? The animal is basically able to move through the environment in one direction perfectly and successfully, focus sense organs on this direction in order to move perfectly, which helps with feeding and avoiding predators, right? This is basically due to cephalization. Another way of putting it, due to cephalization. Mhm. Then give the letters of the organisms that show cephalization. Which organisms have a concentration of sense organs on their anterior end? Yes, 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 and yes, yes, yes. A, B, and C. Good. Now we'll come back to this one later on. Yeah. Now, now that we're done with our body plans, no, not our body plans, but our symmetry. That's only one part. Yeah. Then we come. This was number one. There's four of them to go through. Then let's come to the second part that we need to do. Yeah. That is your tissue or germ layers. Your tissue layers. Germ layers. Great. So what do we need? What do we need to know? What are tissue layers, basically? So remember, after fertilization, of the ova, what happens? As a zygote is formed, and then it will start developing tissue. The first tissue to form in an embryo, né? Those are basically called your germ layers. The first tissues to form, your germinating layers. Basically, from that tissue, it will give rise to different other tissues. It will differentiate into different organs, right? Good. So those are germ layers. All right. Now, what are these germ layers that we speak of? We have what we call the primary germ layer, the primary germ layers, and we have the secondary germ layer. So there's only three of them. Yeah? Good. Now, with these ones, the two primary germ layers are the E layers. I call them the E layers. Ectoderm. What does ecto mean? Ecto, outside, exit. Endo means inside. Endoderm. So these are the two primary layers. And then the third one is a secondary layer, which is known as the mesoderm. Dermis means layer, derm, layer. Good. Meso, remember, is middle. So that's the middle layer. So we have the outermost layer. So if I was to quickly draw it, although it's not, the drawing is not accurate, I will go, this is the ectoderm, an organism with an ectoderm, and then we'll have an organism with an endoderm. Good. When an organism has the ectoderm and the endoderm, so when it just has these two, ectoderm and endo, move, endoderm. This organism is basically diploplastic. They are known as diploplastic organisms. Di meaning it has only two germ layers. But if we introduce a third, the secondary germ layer, a third one, ne, and that is your mesoderm. Mesoderm. So if it has three germ layers, your mesoderm, ectoderm, and then your endoderm, they are known as, what is the prefix for? Three is triploblastic organisms, right? Good. So basically, this is what we're going to be looking at what is basically your ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, right? So, quick summary. The ectoderm and the mesoderm, primary germ layers. Your ectoderm, basically, remember I said these germ layers are the first layers that are formed from an embryo. When you have an embryo, after fertilization is a zygote, then an embryo. Good. Then the ectoderm will give rise to what? Will give rise to the epithelium of an organism, epithelium, the outer covering. In humans, it would be the skin, for example, your nervous tissue, and so forth. Ne? Then the endoderm, it will give rise to the digestive system, ne? Or your digestive tract. That's what it gives rise to. The, the important one now, which you'll find in mostly the most complex organisms such as us, ne? Your chordata mostly, is your mesoderm, the second germ layer. It gives rise to mainly your connective tissue. Your connective tissue. Remember what is connective tissue? Tissue such as your bone is a connective tissue. It will give rise to blood a lot. The lymphatic system, your cartilage comes from the mesoderm, so forth, and your reproductive organs. Reproductive organs. So basically, your reproductive system is mainly made from the mesoderm. So these are your tissue layers. These are the tissue layers found in different organisms. Now, let's look at them from the slides. Now, like I said, we have primary germ layers that consist of the ectoderm, the outer layer, and then your endoderm, the innermost layer. So the ectoderm will develop your skin, for example, or the epithelium, and then your nervous tissue of animals. Yeah? Then the endoderm will form the digestive systems. Animals that only have the endoderm and ectoderm are known as diploblastic or diploblasts. Yeah? Good. Diploblastic organisms do not form complex organs and are primitive animals. Ne? They are primitive animals. So we'll get to have an example of what are diploblastic organisms later. And then secondary germ layers, the mesoderm is the secondary germ layer which develops between the endoderm and ectoderm. If you look at this organism, this diagram over here, we have the ectoderm over here, right on the outside, and then the mesoderm, and then the endoderm, and then we have, obviously, we'll have that cavity in the middle that is called the xylem, but that comes later, right? The mesoderm develops into connective tissue such as your bone, your blood, reproductive organs, cartilage, blood, and the lymphatic system. So that is your tissue layer, so your germ layers. Now let's go back here. For activity 1, we're going to do number 2. Study the diagram below and answer the questions that follow. 2.1. Provide labels for A, B, and C. 2.2, which diagram 1 or 2 is diploplastic? 2.3, in good fashion biology life science, give a reason for your answer in question 2.2. And then lastly, what advantages does an organism with a mesoderm have? Pause the video and start. Right, I believe you're done. Let's look at your answers for question 2. Right, labels, obviously the outermost one. A will be your ectoderm, and then B will be your endoderm, the innermost layer, and then C is your mesoderm, only found in this one only. Which organism? 1, 2 is diploplastic. Diploplastic. It will be organism 1 because it only has the ectoderm and endoderm alone. Now, give a reason for your answer. 1, diploplastic, because it has 2 tissue layers. Triploplastic has 3 tissue layers. 2.4, what advantages does an organism with a mesoderm have? Mesoderm can develop organs, right, such as connective tissue, bone, reproductive organs, cartilage, blood, lymphatic system. That's basically the advantage of having the mesoderm. Right, let's end this lesson and then we'll continue in the next lesson with the third, which are gut openings, and then the pseudo.